Hey, Dr. Scott here, and welcome to Leading in 10, the live stream where we hope to help you amplify your impact in leading yourself and others in only 10 minutes. Now, leadership often comes with heavy responsibilities, but too many leaders neglect one key area: themselves. They push hard, take on enormous workloads, or suffer from a harsh inner critic. What if the way forward isn't more pressure, but more kindness towards ourselves? Joining us today is Dr. Steinel, an expert in compassion-focused therapy, to explore how self-compassion isn't just about feeling good, it's about treating yourself with the same care you'd give to others. We'll unpack how self-compassion transforms leadership, prevents burnout, and brings a balanced perspective to those challenging inner voices. Thanks for joining us, Stan.
Scott, thank you very much for having me.
Self-compassion, what is it?
Well, that's the $64 million question, isn't it? I might actually dial it back and sort of define compassion, really, which is a sensitivity to suffering in self and others, with a commitment to try to alleviate and prevent it. Professor Paul Gilbert, who really was the developer of compassion-focused therapy, he makes the point that compassion actually flows in three directions. So we might be compassionate towards others, and that's the one that people are often very familiar with. We might also open ourselves up to receiving compassion from others. And so that's one to stop and think about as well, I think, for a lot of leaders.
Interesting.
And then the third one is, as you say, self-compassion, the idea of compassion from the self to the self. And in a funny sort of a way, self-compassion is a combination of the first two flows, which is compassion directed outward and compassion received inward. It's just that we are both the giver and the receiver of compassion. It's more about wisdom and strength and courage and care than it is anything self-indulgent or selfish, really. And actually sometimes self-compassion is it's not so much about doing the things that simply feel good, but it's about doing the things that really are good for our own health and well-being.
That's an interesting topic, but I guess to summarize what you're saying, it's really about treating yourself with the same care and respect that you'd extend to somebody that you love.
I think that's right, although I do like to disentangle love and compassion a little bit. Because I think, and especially with self-compassion, I think sometimes we're bringing compassion to those parts of ourselves that actually we really don't love and we don't like. It might be those aspects that we feel very self-conscious about, or possibly even embarrassed or ashamed of. And there'll be those parts of ourselves that we really would much rather not have, and we really would prefer to not get in contact with.
But I think my point is that it's kind of like loving a child. You don't have to like them all the time, but holistically, you love them as wanting to take care of them.
I'll just one more little thought though on that. I mean, sometimes we might bring compassion to an enemy as well. You know, someone that is in fact an enemy, someone that's not a friend or a child or kin or anything like that, but we bring compassion to an enemy. In fact, sometimes our enemies are our best teacher of compassion.
So how can you do that? Getting off the topic a little bit, how can you do that with somebody that you don't like?
Well, I mean, it's interesting. People are probably bringing to mind various, figures around the world that they feel variously about and so on. And one of the things I really like to do is to stop and think that they were a child once too. They were born into this world through no choice of their own. They were born with a brain that they didn't get to choose. They were then kind of shaped through various experiences, again, that they didn't get to choose, and sort of staying connected with the kind of non-personal flow of life in a way, and the fact that this version of themselves that they kind of now present with is not their fault. It might be something that we really need them to take responsibility for. There may even be certain actions we need to take, especially to prevent suffering or the suffering that they may cause to others. But we try to do that without hate, without anger, and with a sense that in a certain degree, it's not their fault.
Yeah. You did something really interesting there that I want to flag. You might totally disagree with me, but my understanding of the brain and the mirror system in particular. So the mirror system is same neurons fire when I feel emotion or if I see somebody else experiencing that emotion. It only works if they're within your in-group. But if they're in your out-group, the mirror system doesn't fire. So you're actually more likely to show compassion to somebody that you view as similar to yourself than different to yourself. And all those words that you were saying is they are similar to me because they were born, they were raised. It was actually highlighting the similarities, saying they are similar
Yes.
to me in some sense. It was quite interesting
Yeah.
hearing you do
Yeah,
that. I don't know if that
really
resonates.
that's a really nice pickup, actually, because there are certain competencies around compassion. And
Yep.
one is sensitivity and noticing the suffering. The next might be empathy, the ability to
Mm.
empathize with and resonate with the person and that experience. But yeah, there's certain competencies, and I think we are trying to cultivate the competency of empathy by having
Mm.
that sense of shared humanity and kind of
Yeah,
common
interesting.
humanity as a way in. But all of that is kind of extra tricky with self-compassion. Like, what's
Exactly.
self-empathy mean?
Yeah.
What's self-sympathy mean?
So coming back to self-compassion, how does this relate to leadership?
Well, I think if we think about the flip side, that a lot of leaders do experience, many pressures, time pressures, outcome pressures, performance pressures. We often then, as leaders, slip into a somewhat perfectionistic style, potentially, where we're starting to sort of really have an ideal sense of who we should be. And then the
Mhm,
problem there is we start to compare what feels like our actual self with this ideal self. And there's a
mhm.
disappointment gap. And we have
Yeah.
this disappointment gap. From there can spill self-criticism. And we
Mhm,
start to criticize ourselves, sometimes very harshly, sometimes in a way that's very self-attacking, self-condemning. And that, of course, self-criticism in particular can lead to lots of difficulties in terms of anxiety or depression, or,
yeah.
like you mentioned at the start, burnout and that sort of thing.
Mhm. It's interesting you say that. So I deal with a lot of leaders in my coaching that when you look at their 360 profile, externally they're doing really well, but internally they're doing very poorly. So they rate themselves as not achieving as much as they should be achieving. They're not connecting with people as much as other people are perceiving that. So that inner critic is really harsh. But
Hmm.
the interesting thing that I notice is when you backtrack, a lot of that kind of stems from childhood in a lot of these
Hmm.
leaders. When you have a look at the environments in which they were raised, they had very critical parents that it was all about external success. You are valuable when you get straight A's. And if you don't, well, where's the missing 1%? What happened to
Hmm.
that? And so they've
Hmm.
sort of internalized this, external environment. I don't know if that's true, or is that what you find as well?
Yeah, I definitely think that in some ways our attachment and caregiving and receiving experiences growing up is really important to this. Where do
Mm,
we learn to soothe ourselves? Well, often it's from having been soothed. And
yeah.
if caregivers are more likely to be critical or even use a kind of a shaming as a way to
Mm,
influence us and our behaviors, then it sticks, it gets in there, and we're left with this sort of two sides of the perfectionism on the one hand and the self-criticism on the other, and we sort of never end up feeling like we've made it or something. We're
yeah.
always feeling like we're chasing something in that way.
So there seems to be kind of two broad issues here. One is that internal dialogue that's going on, but the other one is the outward manifestation that I might be taking on too much. I'm not treating myself, in my environment how I treat other people. Like I'm a workaholic, I'm running myself crazy hours. I wouldn't expect that with anyone else. So there's an outward behavior as well as that inner critic. So in terms
Mm.
of take home messages for these two sorts of issues, what would you say to somebody in that position? What are some
Well,
practical tips?
in terms of the first issue that you raised, one of Professor Paul Gilbert's kind of discoveries, I guess, several decades ago was that people can often, in their own self-talk, they can say the right things, but they still say it in a very harsh and critical inner voice tone. But if you bring in a slightly different tone, that can make all the difference. People might actually wake up tomorrow morning, and as they wake up, they might say to themselves, "Good morning, Stan." Don't say Stan, actually.
Don't say Stan, right? Yeah.
That would be weird. But insert your own name there. Like we need to practice this stuff. We need to practice inner voice tone. And we need to practice managing the body, slowing down the mind to create a sense of calmness. A colleague of mine says, a calm mind thinks differently. And that's our challenge, I think, is if we can create a calmer mind, we can start thinking differently. We can start relating to ourselves in this more warm, friendly, compassionate kind of a way. And then the question, what is it that I really need? What is it that would be most helpful for me that I could do or change or work towards? And that's when we move to the external. That's when we start to notice things. Are there certain activities that I'm doing that I need to change or contain or curtail a little bit? Are there certain things that actually I'm not doing or I used to do but I've stopped that perhaps I need to introduce into my life? It really, self-compassion often is a lot about balance and being able to still have aspirations, still work towards a values-based direction in our working life and so on. And at the very same time, doing things that we kind of know are actually good for us, good for our health, good for our well-being. We know how we would support others. And so we're just trying to widen that circle of compassion to also include ourselves and to do the things in our own life that's good for health and well-being.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you so much. Where can you be found? I've got stansteinel.com if people want to follow you up. Is that the best way to track you down?
Yeah. I'd love people to visit my YouTube channel, I suppose, would be great. Compassion in a T-shirt is the name of the YouTube channel and podcast. So certainly can check some stuff out there.
And I can be found at scottbolland.com. Thank you so much, Stan. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you very much.
Cheers.